Hello Arsenal Vision post-match podcast patrons. Welcome to my match preview for Arsenal versus Watford on Saturday the 29th of September, 3 p.m. at Emirates Stadium. I said in my Everton preview that Everton would offer a really good gauge for where Arsenal are at the moment because we'd played a mixture of quite good and quite terrible teams, and Everton were somewhere in the middle. I'm actually not sure we learned an awful lot about where Arsenal are at the moment from that game. I think maybe Everton were worth a point in the end, so maybe that does tell us something. I think this is a similar challenge against Watford actually, because Watford certainly at the moment are very much kind of in the upper echelons of that middle rung of the Premier League. How long that lasts, we'll wait and see, but the way Watford play is really, really interesting and quite brave actually. They play in a very kind of almost old-fashioned 4-4-2. They've been partnering Troy Deeney with Andre Gray up front, which is quite, shall we say, traditional strike partnership. And I've actually been really entertained watching Watford this season. If I managed a team in that kind of middle rung of the Premier League, that's what I'd do. I'd play two strikers up front. I think the reality is when those teams play one another, the games aren't won by who controls possession or controls midfield. I think, as Leicester proved a couple of seasons ago to great effect, having two strikers and having a little bit more attacking threat is actually a really, really good thing to do if you're in that area of the league. Obviously doing it at Emirates Stadium is something slightly different, but we've seen Watford win at our stadium a couple of times recently. What's quite interesting about Watford's approach, and I expect them to stick with the 4-4-2 to stay with Deeney and Gray up front, is they kind of give you a choice to make, and particularly for a team like Arsenal who likes to push the fullbacks on quite high in Monreal and Bellerin. What Watford do is they make you make a choice. They say, okay, go on then, you push those guys up, we're leaving two up front, and that makes them incredibly dangerous, not just on the counter-attack, but obviously just by virtue of numbers it gives them a little bit more going forward. And one of the things they've done really well this season is support those strikers as well. So Pereira, I believe, is still their top scorer at the moment. Will Hughes has really come into his own a little bit this season, started to show his potential, and they really support the strikers well from wide. And what's really interesting about Watford's midfield is that it's a real unit in that they go forward together and they come back together as well. So they've got a lot of energy and dynamism in there. I just spoke about the wide players, but in the middle as well, Capoue and Decor, both really good athletes capable of getting forward and coming back, and that's kind of what Watford do with that block of four in the middle, and that's they really throw the gauntlet down at the opposition, and that's worked quite well for them so far this season. However, they haven't won since the 2nd of September. Now they've had a couple of draws, a narrow defeat against Manchester United, lost on penalties to Spurs, albeit with a B team, and they've not kept a clean sheet since the opening day. So, they're not conceding 2s and 3s or 4s very often, but they're still kind of vulnerable at the back, and that's something that Arsenal will look at. But I think one of the things that Arsenal have probably got to be wary about now is that they're not quite a surprise package anymore. We've had enough games under Emery now. The little patterns are starting to develop. So I think we've spoken a lot about how unbalanced Arsenal's attack is, and we'll see how that shakes out in the team selection on Saturday. And obviously the fact that we start games really slowly before picking up a bit in the second half. Watford will be very, very aware of that, and I'm sure that Javi Gracia will tell them to try and have a go at Arsenal from the beginning and try and capitalise on the slow start. For Arsenal, it's all about how we line up in attack. I think the back five will pick itself, really. You'll probably see Xhaka and Torreira, I imagine. Then it's just how that front four looks. I don't know if the stories that have come out about Aaron Ramsey in the last couple of days will influence the team selection. I'm not certain that it will. But I think one of the really interesting things now is obviously we've had a Carabao Cup game, we've had a Europa League game, and some of those fringe players have been able to make a bit of a case. And two of the ones who've played kind of notably well, I think, in that time are Danny Welbeck and Alex Iwobi. and neither of those players are as good as Ramsey or Ozil or Aubameyang or Lacazette. But what they can both say is that they potentially offer more balance to the front line. Particularly Iwobi is a much more natural kind of wide player who likes to take players on. And that could be interesting. I wonder if that will give Emery pause for thought. I suspect not. I suspect we'll see the same fairly kind of stodgy, unbalanced attack. Ramsey at 10, Ozil on the right, Aubameyang on the left, which I'm just not a fan of. It takes Ozil too far away from Xhaka, who is the principal kind of water carrier, I guess, in the team in terms of possession. All of Xhaka's passes, well, most of his passes go to the left and Ozil's over on the right, so that starves Ozil of possession. I think Ramsey and Aubameyang take up the same spaces too often. But maybe these things can be worked on, and maybe over time that will change. But I'm just not really a fan of that front four together. I think it needs... basically, I think a front four needs two creators, two attackers, and at the moment what we've got is kind of three attackers and one creator who's not really getting much of the ball because he's too disconnected from the pivot of our team in terms of possession. And then that adds the kind of issue of Bellerin being isolated out on the right, and we have this huge left-sided bias, which I think again is potentially one of the things that makes us a bit predictable. So it'll be really interesting to see, first of all, how the selection shakes out. But if, as I suspect, we go a little bit unchanged in that front six, I guess, whether we start to see more promising patterns develop, I'm not so sure. But I do think this will be a fascinating game. I think it will be a really good game, actually, and I think Arsenal are going to win, but I don't think they're going to have it all their own way. So we'll see anyway come Saturday afternoon. So thank you very much for watching. Most of all, thank you for subscribing to the Arsenal Vision post-match podcast. And I will be back next week with a full match preview for Fulham versus Arsenal.